What's going on, Packers fans? Aaron Nagler here, joined by a very special guest, the Packers beat writer for ESPN LaCrosse. It's Paul Bretl. Paul, how are you today, albeit on a not Victory Monday?
No, it is not, but I'm still happy to be here talking Packers football with you, Aaron.
Always good to talk to you, man. Thanks for stepping in. Andy Herman's a little under the weather on this Monday. Nothing to do with the loss, just not feeling great. So, much like the Packers, it's next man up. And I know you, obviously, you cover this team like a glove. We all talked about kind of leading into this kind of big matchup, this Minnesota Vikings team that had won obviously so many games in a row, so many close games. It ended up being close, but this is a game that really didn't feel that close. I don't know what was your kind of 30,000 foot takeaway from this one?
Yeah, again, against another one of the NFC's top opponents, it was another slow start for this Packers team. And I just look at the passing game. The word I've been using to describe their performance was disjointed. And after the fact, Matt LaFleur shed some light saying that the Vikings played a lot more man coverage than what Green Bay had anticipated. He said there was a couple games ago where they had put a lot of man coverage on film, but as the Packers were going through their game plan, preparing for the week, they did not think that was going to be a big part of the equation. And after the fact, once we learn that little tidbit, it does help explain to a degree what we saw, because again, everything was just off, right? There wasn't that let it rip mentality from Jordan Love. Matt LaFleur on the broadcast at halftime, they had said that the receivers just weren't quite in the right places. And when you're a receiver and you're preparing all week to face specific types of coverages, all right, here's what I'm going to see, here's what I'm going to be up against, here's where I need to be, here's the right timing that I need to be. And then that's just completely wiped away and you get something completely different. You can understand, again, the adjustments need to be made quicker, but you can see where the disjointed nature of the passing game came from. And from there, everything just started to snowball. You're trailing by multiple scores. You can't lean on the run game, which did find some success. Right. You're finding yourselves in third and long situations. That's where this Vikings defense is at its best. They're already aggressive. They're pinning their ears back, getting after the quarterback, and you don't have that big play ability that the Packers have thrived off of in the passing game. One, Christian Watson isn't playing, but two, as LaFleur said, this Vikings defense does a really good job of taking that away. So all of a sudden, you're behind the sticks. They're forcing an offense that's, again, disjointed, not in rhythm. The timing's off. They have to put together 8, 10, 12 play drives to march down the field, and you get a performance like we saw for really 3/4 of that game, where Green Bay had struggled to move the ball, find consistency, particularly through the passing game.
Yeah, and it's funny to watch the offense somewhat come to life, right? The final 8 minutes or so of the game. But at that point, the Vikings are playing with such a multi-score lead. Mm-hmm. They clearly changed their approach as far as not quite prevent, but man, lots of 3-man rushes and dropping into deep zones and letting things kind of happen in front of them. And that's when, they kind of came to life. But to your point right at the beginning there, as far as I understood LaFleur taking the ball, trying to march down the field, take control of the game right from the outset, much like he did in Seattle. And I thought they were on their way to doing that until Jacobs coughed up the football. It's fascinating to me, just the psyche of a team where you're right, there's lots of disjointedness on offense. But it's funny to watch, not how deflated, I won't say that, although I think that's a word that Jacobs himself used in the postgame. But it was kind of fascinating to see how everything seemed to be firing on that first kind of 4 or 5 plays and really starting to march the ball down the field, start idea of taking control of the game. And then the fumble really seemed to just take the wind out of their sails. And then the next time they got the ball, backed up kind of deep in their own end, you've got 3 incompletions and you're punting. And from that moment on, it really felt like they were searching. And obviously, like you said, the man coverage maybe caught them off guard. And I think you can see what you're talking about as far as a couple of the misses from Love early on. It's funny because in the moment you're thinking, oh, he's off, right? The quarterback is off. But then you look, there's one to Tucker Kraft, there's one to Wicks. I think there's another one to Dobbs where the ball is just falling a yard or two in front of the receivers, and you think, oh, he's thrown it short. But you go back and you look at it, and it's pretty clear he thinks they're breaking at a different point than where they actually end up breaking. Mm-hmm. And I'm of two minds about this, and I want to get your take, because on the one hand, yes, you're presented with something you weren't expecting, and the rhythm and timing is a little bit off, even after you have kind of dissected what they're doing, and you try to counter with, whatever your man beaters are, what have you. It's a fascinating kind of flummoxing turn when this is a team that is, got all the talent in the world, yet here sitting in week 17, it's kind of baffling how they're not able to turn, maybe not on a dime, but they're not able to kind of adjust and be in rhythm even after all offseason, all summer long, all these games they've played. The way they are not on the same page, I'm not going to say it's alarming, but it's surprising to me, given how good and in sync they looked down the stretch last season.
Yeah, it's those adjustments, and I don't want to say lack of. Obviously, there's adjustments made throughout the game, but it's the ability to capitalize on the adjustments that you make that, like you said, it's not just the Vikings game. It's been happening throughout the course of the season. I talked about this after the Lions game.
Yeah.
The offense the passing game specifically came alive in the second half of that game, but to me, it took too long to get to that point when Detroit is loading the box, telling you, throw the ball, we're not going to let you run.
Right.
There was just too long of an adjustment period before they got to that point where they were leaning on the passing game. And something Matt LaFleur has talked about, these games, especially close ones against top tier opponents, it comes down to 3, 4, 5 plays a game, but you don't know when those plays are going to come up. Like, we can look at that Lions game and see the game winning field goal, but there were 4 or 5 other plays throughout the course of the game, those 4th down touchdowns, other conversions that they had that played pivotal roles in defining the outcome of that game. And not knowing where they're going to come, to put yourself in the best position to take advantage of those situations whenever they may arise, you got to be consistent. You have to make those adjustments quickly, because the inability to do so is what's going to send you home in January. And we can even look at that Seattle game. Again, they put up 30 points. For the most part, that offense did what they wanted in that game, but there's a 4 possession stretch in the third quarter. I think they went punt, fumble, punt, turnover, and downs. And again, you're not going to score on every possession, but the fact that you had that string of possessions and it took a total of 15 plays over those 4 possessions,
right,
that can be a killer come the postseason. And against the Lions, the Vikings, and Eagles, that could turn into 10 points for the opponent, 14 points for the opponent, where all of a sudden you go from a tie game to you're down 2 scores. You have a lead to all of a sudden it's vanished. So it's that consistency that is still missing from this Packers team. And that, again, I don't want to say lack of adjustments, but not capitalizing on the adjustments quick enough, that contributes to digging yourself in a hole, having to find a way to come back against these really good teams. And the margin for winning and losing in football, as LaFleur says, and we all know, it's razor thin. And by putting yourself in those deficits, you're just making an already difficult matchup, difficult task, so much more challenging.
Well, and LaFleur mentioned it after the game, and he was spot on regarding that building with that defense thrives on getting you into 2nd and 3rd and long, and then just going to town with their pressure packages. And the Packers, it's funny because they were somewhat better on 3rd down last night comparative to what they've done the last 2 or 3 weeks, but they were so porous on 1st and 2nd down as far as making sure they were staying ahead of the sticks. Man, they were. And then it's a variety of things, whether it's the play call, whether it's a missed pass or a drop or a pre-snap penalty or a holding call. They just had a litany of ways of shooting themselves in the foot in that environment in particular. I mean, you saw there was the incompletion from Love where Walker gets beat like right off the snap of the ball. And look, that's a good player. Guys get beat, right? But you're not getting yourself into a winning position where it's 3rd and 10. You're deep in your own end. It's loud as hell. Your tackle has to be looking inside. Okay, there's the snap of the ball. Well, this guy's already coming. And now you've got your head around. Now you're late. And that's what they thrive on. And the Packers were just living there way too much. And I thought as the game went on, especially kind of 4th quarter, not only did the Packers operate much better in that environment, but I thought you saw their pass rush, lose some legs, no doubt about it. You're playing a bunch of snaps, you're flying off the ball all game long. That helped the Packers, but it was, I guess, too little too late. I want to ask you about the approach on offense, as far as there's no doubt that LaFleur came into this game knowing he had to run the ball. There's a tough team to run the ball against. Jacobs, I think we got about 60 yards. averaged just over 4 yards a carry, which again against the Vikings is pretty
Mm-hmm.
damn impressive. They have been stout all year long, especially in that building. What did you make of the fact that, when they got down multiple scores, they went all not exclusively, but mostly with Emmanuel Wilson? And I get that it's, 2 minute stuff, up tempo stuff where they like Wilson, but I was surprised they didn't use Brooks more, especially in a game where you're dealing with pressure and Brooks is clearly the superior pass protector.
Yeah, coming into the game, I thought this was going to be a big Chris Brooks game, obviously filling in for Josh Jacobs because of that pass protection ability. But I think the down multiple scores, needing an impact, some outlet option in the passing game. Not that Chris Brooks can't provide that, but we've seen Emmanuel Wilson with the ball in his hands, since he got to Green Bay. There always seems to be, whether it's a catch or a run, where he just has the ability to generate a fairly big play when he has the ball. And so my guess right now is that was a part of the equation, and just wanting to have a more dynamic outlet option in Wilson compared to Brooks for that passing game to try to generate some sort of push for this Packers team on the offensive side of the ball. But to your point, especially against these top level teams, as we go into the postseason, we all know things can switch at the drop of a hat, but it's the fact that it's the same kind of script, the same kind of miscues that are popping up for this Packers team, especially on offense, that right now, obviously raises some questions, because who are they going to have to go through in the playoffs? Obviously these top tier teams.
Yeah, I think the last thing on the offense, one thing that really stood out to me rewatching the game is the fact that, and this is a recurring theme when it comes to these losses against the better teams in the league, these slow starts on offense and the offensive issues in general, something that ties all these performances together is their best players not playing their best against the best. Like, your studs have to bring their A game. You can't have arguably your best player on offense fumbling the ball. You can't wipe out a third down conversion with an illegal procedure penalty, which happened to Zach Tom. You can't, drop passes on 4th and 2 that would set you up for a possible touchdown. It's just, your best players have to play their best. And once again, that didn't occur in Minnesota.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point. And, any week, behind any success, any failure, we always want to pick out what's that one thing that helped them win, what's that one thing that went wrong. But a performance, again, in football in general, such a nuanced game, there's so much that goes into any success or failure. And really at all levels of this Packers, on the offensive side of the ball, there were miscues. You mentioned the penalties, the pressures, especially in the second half as Minnesota ramped up their pass rush, started to get after Love. There were some off-target throws that he had, drops, penalties. Matt LaFleur, again, shouldering the blame for not having some answers in the playbook sooner for the man coverage heavy approach that the Vikings threw at them. So again, these performances, it's in all aspects, all phases of the game, all players that the Packers have to improve upon.
Switching it over to the defensive side of the ball, I know you're a creature of the internet like myself, and post game, everyone's ready to burn everything down and fire everybody and cut everybody. Jeff Hafley was getting compared to Joe Barry, and look, I understand there's frustration, especially against a Vikings team that did move the ball. I mean, Darnold was absolutely on fire over the middle of the field, but I really came away from that game thinking Hafley did a pretty damn good job, given what he kind of entered the game with, as far as being down a number of starters and then losing one of his starting safeties in Zane Anderson 11 snaps into the game, and thereby causing everyone switch kind of their roles and positions. I thought against that offense in particular, where you are guarding against Jefferson going deep at any second, Addison can take the top off at any moment. And you've got Hawkinson parading around the middle of the field. I just thought, given what they were up against and what they had to work with, I thought Hafley called a hell of a game. And I get it's frustrating watching the Vikings march up and down the field, but overall, I thought the defense did a well enough job to keep them in the football game, which is, again, against that team in their house. That's what I'm asking for.
Yeah, I 100% agree. In fact, when the Packers kicked their first field goal and they were up 3-0, I thought to myself, I can't believe they have the lead right now. The defense on those first few possessions to even give Green Bay the opportunity to take the early lead. I mean, that was a big point in the game. Unfortunately, the offense couldn't continue to capitalize on that. But to your point, this is a Vikings offense that has so many weapons at their disposal. And Packers obviously shorthanded in the secondary. And something I just want to highlight, after the Jacksonville game, Evan Williams exited that game early.
Yep.
Javon Bullard had to move from slot to safety, just as he did this week. Those following days, Jeff Havley talked about, not just for a rookie, but in general, making that movement, that leap in the middle of a game is a lot to ask of a player, especially a rookie. Again, I don't specifically know what the practice reps were like this week, but typically if you're the starting slot, that's where all your reps are coming from throughout the week of practice. And so I'm going to guess that's what Bullard was asked to do in practice. And all of a sudden he's taking on a completely different role. You're asking a lot. Again, they didn't have Jair Alexander. They had to have late movement, as you mentioned, in the secondary because of the injuries. And a number of those pressures that the Packers generated early in the game, I thought were coverage induced with
100%.
Sam and Darnold not having anywhere to go with the football.
I mean, it's fascinating too to watch like the kind of correlation between Zane Anderson of all people, which I can't believe is an actual real thing I'm saying out loud into a microphone. But Zane going out changed everything because while he's in there, you're 100% correct. Darnold several times got flushed from the pocket because he had nowhere to go with the ball. So yeah, it's the juggling there is what I'm talking about. When, man, given who they were up against, I thought he did a pretty damn good job.
And we've seen the middle of the defense exposed at different times this season. There was the stretch where they were without Edgerrin Cooper recently, where teams were having success, but he came back into the mix and obviously provided a difference-making presence there. And to your point, I do think Zane Anderson, again, exiting the game, played a big factor in the Vikings' ability to capitalize over the middle field. And again, Bullard's a safety, but I just want to emphasize that. That's a big jump in responsibilities that you're asking a rookie to make in his first game back after injury.
Coming back from a couple of weeks off with injury, right?
Exactly. So it all works together. And then again, there's more stress on the secondary when your pass rush isn't getting after the quarterback at a high enough rate.
There's the rub, sir. I mean, it's one thing to play whatever, combination of zones that they threw at them and the precious few man snaps, which again is understandable. But man, the inability to get to the quarterback, however you're trying, whether they sent pressure, whether they were rushing for, it's fascinating to watch. The one big turnover play, the interception, happens because the pocket is getting constricted and Darnold has nowhere to escape and really can't step into that throw. It's amazing. That's the formula. You want to make sure those four are constricting the pocket and forcing that quarterback to get the ball out. It just didn't happen with any kind of regularity after that first kind of couple drives. And, as frustrating as it is, I'm fascinated to see if this ever happens this year. Maybe we have to wait till next season. But if they can ever get Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper on this field the majority of these snaps, I think it'll look a lot different in the middle of the field. And I know Eric Wilson is a vet who's played a lot, but man, it is really noticeable when teams are taking advantage of him in coverage. He had a couple of plays where he's right there and just missing, but he's getting targeted. And I think that's smart if you're an offensive coordinator, because that's where you want to go. But if they could ever get Quay Walker and Edgerrin Cooper out there together, I think it would look very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're asking your shorthanded secondary against Jefferson, Addison, Hawkinson to have to routinely defend those guys for 3-4 seconds, I mean, pick a defense in the NFL. That is a tall task that you're asking of that group. And the Packers pass rush over the last several weeks had been trending in the right direction, but again, against a top tier opponent, they regress towards kind of what they've been for much of the season. And not to excuse the level of play, they need to win their one-on-one matchups more. But I do think this context is important to what we're seeing. Obviously, in the 4-3 defense under Jeff Hafley, you're at a numbers disadvantage up front. You're at 4 versus 5 linemen. A lot of offenses in the NFL, and LaFleur's talked about this because of the athleticism at the tight end position. Those guys are staying into chip. Now it's 6 versus 4. If the running back's back there's another player that's a part of that equation. So again, the Packers have to be better. Their four-man front has to get after the quarterback more consistently. But I do think that's an important element to at least be mindful of as we see this group again, be inconsistent with their pass rush because there's a numbers disadvantage versus the 3-4 where you have 5 down linemen essentially with the edge rushers getting after the quarterback. At least you're one-on-one in those instances. And then the way players chip or passed off, a lot of these defensive linemen are getting touched by multiple offensive linemen on every single snap. Right. And I know Kenny Clark, Rashawn Gary, PFF tracks how often players are double team off in their chip. Both of those players are near the top of their respective position group. So again, that's not to take away or say that they don't have to get better. They absolutely have to get better at getting after the quarterback more consistently. But I think that is something that we should at least be mindful of as we watch the defense unfold.
And it's interesting you bring up, that defensive front. One thing, I think a lot, we just talked about Zane Anderson going out, things getting moved around in the backfield, but something that I haven't seen get a lot of play is losing Devontae Wyatt. Mm-hmm. I really think hurt them up front because I thought, down in and down, would he play like 11 snaps? I thought he looked ready to go. Like he looked like he was going to be a difference maker in that game, and then they lose him, and things really got static in the middle there. I thought Brooks played well. You saw Wooden involved a lot more than usual, but I thought Wyatt was ready to have a special game, and then they lose him for the balance of the game. And I thought that really hurt them as far as just not just in the pass rush, but just disruption up front. Because it looked like he was ready to go.
And I think I mentioned this coming into this game. One of the reasons I thought that the recent play of the pass rush was more sustainable was because you've had a number of players who have been trending in the right direction. Devontae Wyatt, Rashawn Gary, Carl Brooks feels like there's at least a pass rush rep or two each week where he just leaps off the screen. Yeah. You had Bari coming along. Brenton Cox has made an impact since stepping out. I thought that there were enough players trending in the right direction that this was okay. What we've seen over the last month could be sustainable, but obviously there's still work to do. And to highlight a positive from the defensive front, this group continues to play really well against the run, and that's something that they've done all season long. And I asked Matt LaFleur and Jeff Hafley about it this past week, specifically Rashawn Gary. And LaFleur said, and I know pressure, sacks, that's what garners the attention. That's what gets those guys paid at the end of the day. But Rashawn Gary's doing a lot of the dirty work in the run game, setting the edge. Again, his willingness to take on double teams, opening up opportunities for others. And that run defense is one area this season where this defense is night and day different from what we've seen in past years.
No question about it. Paul Bretl, always appreciate your thoughts and takes. Make sure you're following him on Twitter. Make sure you're checking out his stuff at ESPN LaCrosse. Paul, thanks so much for the time, man.
Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate it.